In exploring the causes of the Cold War, one must understand that capitalism and communism are inherently antagonistic. In capitalism, there is private property for personal gain. Capitalism assumes a selfish nature of man, that people will work their hardest when they personally rewarded. Capitalism assumes that there'll be inequality of wealth, but believe that the common good will also benefit. If everyone has the freedom to work for their own benefit, they'll work their butt off and overall society will improve. Capitalism believes that government is necessary to ensure the equality of opportunity, that is, the right of everyone to accumulate property, but otherwise it should be as limited as possible. It needs to protect property against crime, but should not interfere with individual initiative. It has no role in ensuring equality of outcome. Communism, by contrast, was first developed by the 19th century German philosopher, journalist, and activist Karl Marx, who lived much of his life in London viewing the Industrial Revolution that was taking place around him. Marx wrote several books which developed his theories about human society evolving, theories which became known as Marxism. Two of his most famous books was the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, and Das Kapital, the first volume published in 1867. Marx believed that human society evolved through stages, and in each a minority exploited the majority. In feudalism, for example, there's no money, only land, but all the land was controlled by the minority of people known as lords. They had their own army, the knights, and exploited the vast number of landless peasants, which of course were known as serfs. When the Renaissance developed, Marx believed, a new phase in human society emerged based on money, private property in the marketplace. Marx termed this phase capitalism, thus helping to popularize that term. In time, Marx believed, the money and the property would accumulate in the hands of a few, which he termed the bourgeois. This minority would exploit the propertyless, moneyless masses, which Marx termed the proletarian. Marx's theories were complex and included his belief that the minority of people used religion to pacify the exploited majority, and that the property continued to accumulate at the top. Capitalism would lead ultimately to imperialism. This was the period in which Marx believed that he existed. The Industrial Revolution facilitated the consolidation of money at the top. In time, Marx argued, a new phase of human society would develop, communism. At some point, with all the money and property accumulated at the top, the propertyless masses would rise up worldwide. It would be a spontaneous uprising, without a leader, and when it had finished, the people would share the wealth equally. In this phase of human development, there would be no individual ownership of property. In communism, all would share and have what they needed. The Marxian philosophy was, therefore, a 19th century utopian theory. To Marx, people were inherently good, and they would be willing to share. They'd be willing to work the hardest they could, not just for themselves, but for the common good. There would not only be equality of opportunity, but actual equality of outcome. Without want there'd be no crime. There'd be no need for government either. After Marx's death in 1883, his theories were adopted by a revolutionary in Russia, Vladimir Ulyanov, who took the name Lenin. Russia at the time was governed by a monarchy, the Tsar, and a small oligarchy of rich. The vast masses in Russia were poor. When Russia entered World War I but began to lose to Germany and the Central Powers, the masses of poor, of course, were the ones dying at the front, not the rich minority. Lenin believed that war simply made the rich richer, and he accepted the struggle that Marx described, but he revised Marx's theories. The revolution that Marx thought would be worldwide and spontaneous would, Lenin believed, occur in fact one country at a time. Lenin clearly assumed Russia was that country, and the revolution would also have a leader, a role, of course, in which he envisioned himself. Now, once the revolution had come to Russia and the people there were sharing the wealth and were, therefore, in the communist phase of society, the rest of the countries in the world would still be in the capitalist phase. controlled by the minority of property owners. These countries would, of course, fear the one communist country, and they'd try to kill it. The one communist country would, therefore, need an all-powerful government to protect the revolution. In fact, the one communist country would never be safe until communism had spread from one capitalist country to another. The one communist country, therefore, also needed an all-powerful government to spread the revolution. And only when the revolution had finally succeeded and all the world's countries were now in the communist phase could that all-powerful government cease to exist. Only then will the world finally reach Marx's utopian communist world. With the revised Marxism, Lenin helped lead a revolution against the Russian Tsar, even as Russia fought in World War I. Lenin promised his followers, turned Bolsheviks, that if they put him in power, he'd get Russia out of the war and all the people would share the wealth. Lenin's revolution in 1917 succeeded, and Lenin formed the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union for short. A Soviet was a committee of workers. Its flag was red, the color of revolution, and it had a hammer representing the poor workers and a sickle representing the poor farmers. In any event, Lenin's version of Marxism and the success of his 1917 revolution clearly laid the foundation for the antagonism that began the Cold War. This concludes the section on the foundation of the Cold War being in the differences between capitalism and communism.